afternoon from the beautiful city of London, 5 p.m. and pretty dark already. My name is Fiorella, and I will be hosting this webinar today. To begin and to check if everything is okay, can people please write in the chat box at the bottom of the screen where they are listening to us from? I'm already seeing some messages. Yes, hello. Hello, Egypt. Wow, from India, Dubai, welcome. From Milan.
The whole
Wow,
world.
from
Hello,
Boston
world.
already. Yes, very international. We love it. From Indonesia, Slovenia, Nigeria. That's great. We will begin shortly.
Oh, and Tehran, thank you for being up at this hour. Excellent. And Oklahoma, hi, Karen. How are you?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hult's Virtual Skill Labs. This forum is an online global meeting space offering you the opportunity to skill up and get ahead from home. Connect with like-minded go-getters from all over the globe and hear from world-class Hult professors on the latest topic and trends in life, interactive workshops, and webinars. For those who are joining a Hult event for the first time, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about us. Hult have designed a school that looks to the future by focusing on developing your leadership skills, challenging you with a future-oriented curriculum, and building a global perspective that only first-hand experience can bring. We currently offer an undergraduate program, 5 specialist one-year master program, a one-year global MBA, and a uniquely flexible part-time executive MBA. More information on our programs and the upcoming scholarship deadline can be found at hult.edu. Today, we are joined by Hult Professor Michael McCarthy to explore the topic of how to increase your peak performance productivity with groundbreaking science. Now, before we begin, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. A recording of the webinar will also be sent out to everyone via email in the next few days. Professor McCarthy's masterclass will last approximately 45 minutes, including questions. So please make sure to write your questions in the Q&A box and he will answer them. I would now like to hand over to Professor McCarthy. Professor.
Okay, thank you, Fiorella. Everyone, nice to meet you all. I'm tuning in from Boston, Massachusetts, where I'm stuck indoors and my only way out is through my laptop. So I'm good to see you all. I spend most of my time teaching at Harvard University. I've been there for about 10 years, and I've been teaching at Hult for about 3 years now. And I really enjoy Hult because the students are so global. Everyone's from everywhere else, and I actually really enjoy that. So a lot of times while I'm teaching you, you're teaching me something, which is a lot of fun, because to get the local perspective from people that live locally in that country is a lot different than the news you can get off the internet, and it's typically a lot different. So I really enjoy getting accurate information from people that actually live in those countries. What we're going to be talking about today is some groundbreaking science, basically based on getting your GPA increase. So at the end of this 45 minutes, you're actually going to learn how to increase your GPA. And what we're sharing with you is not self-help, it's not someone's theory, it's actually verified research by science. And most of the science was researched through Microsoft, the US Army, and the University of Pennsylvania. So let's dig in on getting you into peak performance. So the first study that we're going to be taking a look at is actually an internal study that was done at Microsoft. You're not going to be seeing this publicly. The reason that I have access to the study is that one of my Harvard students is in the artificial intelligence department at Microsoft, and she was sharing with me some details on how Microsoft uses technology to increase your performance. And the one thing that they wanted to take a look at is what is the impact of being interrupted? And what is the impact of multitasking? So probably a lot of you are doing what I'm doing right now is I'm teaching in my laptop, but I have over here my smartphone. And the other thing that I do is that my background is Wall Street. So I'm a retired money manager on Wall Street. And this is my quote machine. Notice that it's closed, otherwise I'm going to stare at it. So I actually have two distractions in front of me. And a lot of people think that multitasking is doing tasks at the same time. However, only about 3% of humans can actually multitask. So 97% of us, which is you and I, what we do is we basically will turn off one of our pieces of attention to go focus somewhere else. So let's say that I want to stare at my phone because I got a beep. Well, I'm teaching you, and I think that I'm just looking over here while I'm teaching you. What's actually happening is I'm going to stop teaching. So I off ramp that activity. I on ramp staring at my phone. Then I off ramp staring on my phone and on ramp back to looking at my laptop. So you're not multitasking, you're actually switching tasks. So you're task switching. And if you keep doing that, it actually adds up. It may only take a second, but what Microsoft wanted to look at is what is the impact of one interruption, just one. So they took a look at their coders and they wanted to see what happens with productivity. So they basically were studying the coders and they looked at how fast they were typing. So let's say that when they were at max productivity, they're at 100 keystrokes per minute. So let's just take the number 100. And then they intentionally sent them a text, or they sent them an email, or they called them, or they came into their cubicle, but they basically interrupted them. So of course, the 100 keystrokes per minute slowed down. It stopped for a second because they said, yeah, can I help you? Then they went back to typing. And they then investigated and recorded how long does it take to get back to 100 keystrokes per minute, which was the maximum productivity. And actually, it takes 23 minutes. Now, this is what happens to you and what happens to me, that if you do your homework, or you're trying to write a paper, or you're trying to listen in class and you have your phone in front of you. By the way, I let people use their phones in class. You've paid for this class, you can do whatever you want. You're a grown up now. But if you move over and look at your phone, it's going to take you 23 minutes to get back to hyper focus that you had before. Now, I love opportunities. So when my phone beeps, I look at it. I'm like everybody else. And what I didn't realize, which is actually really important, is it's not just a second of my time looking over at the phone. It's 23 minutes before I get back to focus. So now it becomes the question of who is in control of your time, you or someone who's sending you a text. So what I encourage people to do, that when you're doing your homework or something that has a deadline or something that you want to focus on, turn your phone onto airplane mode and turn your notifications off just for the period of time that you want to do the task. So for example, besides teaching, I'm also a student at University of Pennsylvania getting my master's in positive psychology. So I have to write a 3-page paper based on all these research articles. So I have to go through all this stuff. It takes a few hours. If I keep my phone on, it's going to take me forever to write this paper. So what I do is I just put my phone on airplane mode. I focus on the paper. And then when I'm done, I turn my phone on and sure, there's some text waiting for me. There's some emails. I have found that I have not missed a major opportunity by having my phone on airplane mode for up to an hour. And I actually find that it's pretty relaxing knowing that people can't reach me. So next time you keep looking at the phone, and again, I love my phone, so I'm not telling people not to use the phone or social media. Just be mindful that it will take you 23 minutes to get back to hyper focus. And that is something that actually will drop your GPA by keeping your phone on and trying to multitask. And remember, we don't multitask, we task switch. So for increased productivity, turn off notifications and turn on airplane mode just for the period of time that you're doing your paper. I usually do it for about an hour at a time. The next one is a study on what is the optimal ratio of working and resting. So, we all have about 12 hours during the day, give or take, that we're awake. Now, if I sat you down and said, hey, you have a final exam to study for, it's 8 a.m., why don't you study 12 hours for it? And just kind of sit there at 8 a.m. and sit there until 8 p.m. Don't move. Well, that's not going to happen. No one can sit anywhere for 12 hours at a time. So you need a break. But when? Is there this optimal ratio of how long you should study or work? And is there an optimal ratio of how much of a break you should take? So what the Army actually did, this was the US Army, they gave soldiers a ton of bricks, literally a brick, a ton of them, 2,000 pounds. And they said, move these bricks over here. That was it. And they studied them. So they gave people different tasks. They said to one soldier, move the bricks, and you can't stop until all the bricks are moved over. Well, he collapsed. He didn't finish the task. So that didn't work. But then they did other people and they said, okay, well, why don't you work for an hour and take a break for 10 minutes? Another person work for 2 hours and take a 30-minute break. So they kept playing with the work-rest ratio. And they found that there was actually an optimal ratio where if you worked before exhaustion, so you took a break before you got tired, and you had a small break, enough to give you some restoration, enough of like a real break, not a 2-minute break, but not a 2-hour break either. They found that you could actually come back more refreshed. And what they found that the magic ratio was 52 and 17. So you work for 52 minutes, and then you take a 17-minute break. And here's what's interesting about this ratio is when I started teaching at Harvard, they told me during some of our 3-hour lectures, we have 3-hour classes, and they vary. They said, make sure that you have a break every 50 minutes because the human attention span doesn't go beyond 50 minutes. So what's interesting is that now we're having some crossover from some other studies that actually support the US Army study that 50 minutes is about as long as a human can go before we start to stop having peak performance. So remember, this talks about peak performance. You can still go beyond 50 minutes, but I would position to you that probably the first 15 minutes of studying, you're really sharp. But then by the time that first hour comes along, or an hour and a half, 2 hours, when you start reading the same sentence 2 or 3 times, stop. It's just not working. You need to take a break. So the Army found that it was 52 minutes with a 17-minute break. And here's how you do it. You put the phone on airplane mode for 52 minutes and you set the alarm for 52 minutes. At 52 minutes, the alarm goes off, and then wherever you are, I was actually writing this paper before this webinar, I stopped. I was actually in the middle of doing something, and I usually am, and I was like, oh, I just want to spend a few more minutes. I'm kind of in flow. No, you stop right away. Then you take your 17-minute break. And what I found is I will actually get a better idea during that 17-minute break. So when I come back to my paper, I can actually write a better paper. So the concept that I first started was I'm at 52 minutes, I'm in flow, I get my 17-minute break. Oh, I'm just going to take my break and keep working on my paper. No, doesn't work that way. You stop, you leave. So I actually walked around the block for my 17-minute break, and I put some towels in the laundry. That was it. So I cleared my head. I got a better idea on what to do for my paper, and now I come back. If you're tired, you can take a 17-minute nap. And you see that little cup of coffee in the slide? Caffeine takes 20 minutes to kick in. So if you drink a medium-sized cup of coffee, which is 50 milligrams of caffeine, then you lie down to take a nap, you don't need to set an alarm. Your body will wake yourself up in 20 minutes because the caffeine kicks in. You can play with this ratio. I found that my optimal ratio is 40 minutes of work and a 20-minute break. So I actually have a shorter work period and a higher rest period. So you can play around with the 52-17, just sort of see like where you want to go with it. But you can actually work a 12-hour workday without being tired if you do 52 and 17. And that actually ends up being about 8 hours of work. Now let's get into how to raise your GPA. So we're going to be taking a combination of two studies that were done at the University of Pennsylvania. So this is where I'm going now. University of Pennsylvania started the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. I was rejected once going there about 10 years ago, and now I got in. They only take about 47 people for every 3,000 applicants. So I'm excited to be a part of the program. And I'm going to be coming back to Hult. And actually, when you take a look at the study I'm about to show you, I'm actually making a proposal that Hult changes the way that they admit students into school. And I believe that I can predict students who are going to succeed better at Hult through this study. But I'm also going to be using this study to teach you how to raise your GPA. So the study is based on optimism. Now, optimists are more successful in the world than pessimists. So people that say things that are great have a better life. They're more successful than people that say that life's awful and things are bad. You get more opportunities, people like you better, you get more people wanting to work with you, and people basically like optimists better than people who are pessimists. So we're going to be starting with a real live case study. So when you come to Hult, you're going to be learning a lot of case studies. At Harvard Business School, we like to use the case study method, which basically means we don't teach you academic stuff. We teach you real world things that happened in the past so that you can actually see what happened in the real world and how can you work with it. And using the concepts of a case study lets you know how you could actually apply what happened in the past to what you're going to be dealing with in the future. So MetLife is one of the largest insurance companies in the world. So we're going to be going through a live case study, which is something that you would be seeing at HBS or at Hult. So here we go. MetLife, one of the largest insurance companies in the world, hired Penn to solve a problem. So here's the background. 60,000 applicants per year were applying for the life insurance agent position at MetLife. They wanted to sell life insurance. And life insurance can be pretty lucrative. You can make easily $250,000, $500,000 a year doing that. Now, of the 60,000 applicants that applied to MetLife, they only hire 5,000 per year. So it's an 8.3% acceptance rate, and they have a very stringent acceptance policy. However, you'll see that the acceptance policy was flawed. Here's the problem. They were hiring the cream of the crop, the most elite applicants, the top 5,000 out of 60,000. But look what happened. 50% were quitting in year one, 80% were quitting by the end of year four. So they weren't hiring the right people. And it cost them $30,000 per agent to train them. Now, if you look at the number of agents that quit, 2,500 quit per year. So it's a 50% quit rate. 5,000 are accepted every year, half quit, that's 2,500. So 2,500 agents quit and they don't have to pay back the $30,000 training fee. What's 30,000 times 2,500? $75 million in lost training costs. They spent all 75 million bucks training these people. They're not there anymore. So they're not there to bring in commissions or insurance policy that are going to be recouping the investment that MetLife had. So MetLife hired Penn and said, hey, can we do a better job hiring? This is also going to be applied to Penn realized that they were having the same issue with graduates coming into Penn. Freshmen were quitting in year one or failing out by year four. And they wanted to know, can we do a better job of accepting students who are going to be more successful coming in? So you're going to be looking at actually two studies at the same time. So this is how salespeople quit. And this is also how college students drop out of college. It's the same process. So every day, the insurance agent was getting a lot of no's, people rejecting them. They don't want to buy life insurance. This is the same thing as you getting a lot of bad grades in a row, C's and D's on your quizzes and your tests. It's discouraging. So the average agent and the average student started to feel discouraged. I get bad grades. No one's buying life insurance from me. So each subsequent, no, I don't want to buy life insurance from you, and each subsequent, you got another C and another D, it just hurts you more and more emotionally. So now more effort is required to keep going for the next sales call. More effort is required to study for the next exam, but you're afraid you're going to fail again. So what happens? Procrastination. You don't study for the exam because if you procrastinate, you're actually putting off failing. That's why people procrastinate. It's a way to put off failure. So you go put your head in the refrigerator, you take a walk around the block, you go for lunch, you do everything but study. And the same thing as the MetLife insurance agents, they do everything but sell insurance. And of course, production drops for the MetLife agent, your grades get even worse, and then your manager says, hey, you're not selling well. Or the dean tells you, hey, your grades are bad. Guess what? You already knew that. So when your manager or your dean tells you that you're not performing well, this is when you start to think of quitting, which is why telling a student that they're not performing well actually makes it worse, not better, because they already know. So now it's just known to everybody else. It's like another nail in the coffin. It's not helpful. So by the time the next challenge arrives, the next quiz, or the next time you have to make a sales call, the salesperson can't overcome it and they quit. And the student either doesn't take the next exam and they drop out. So it's the same idea of failure, but we're going to be talking about success. So what they did at Penn is they created what was called the ASQ, the Attributional Style Questionnaire, where they were measuring people on a range of deep pessimism to irrepressible optimism. So here's the math formula. The greater the optimism a person has, the greater the persistence they're going to have towards a goal, and the more immunity they're going to have towards feelings of helplessness. If you want to learn more about this, this is my professor, Martin Seligman. He's the father of positive psychology. And I'm actually going to be sharing with you the research study I'm teaching you now actually came out of this book, Learned Optimism. So let's keep going. You can get the book on Amazon, and I'll flash the book up again at the end. So what we're looking at in optimism is the optimistic explanatory style, which is basically, what do you say to yourself when you hear no? What do you say to yourself when you get a C? What do you say to yourself when someone doesn't want to buy life insurance from you? Well, this is the inner voice. Well, this is the inner voice of an optimist when they hear no on life insurance. The prospect was too busy right now. They already have insurance, but 8 out of 10 people are underinsured. I must have called during supper, or they say nothing. They don't look into it. They just make the next phone call. A pessimist says, I'm no good. No one wants to buy insurance from me. I can't even get to first base. Now, how do you handle this in your inner voice when you get a bad grade on an exam? An optimist says, I didn't study enough. I don't really like the subject matter. I was bored. I was hungover. I didn't budget enough time. I just didn't put in the effort that I needed to do. That's what an optimist would say. A pessimist would say, I'm stupid. I'm never going to get this. And there's no point in me even trying. So there's a big difference between optimism and pessimism in your explanatory style. So the way to find out whether or not you're an optimist or a pessimist is to take the ASQ questionnaire, which is in the Learned Optimism book. And they give you 12 hypothetical scenarios. 6 are good. So you get the scenarios like, hey, you suddenly became rich, and you have to explain, why do you think that happened to you? I deserve it. It was meant for someone else, and I happen to be in the right place at the right time. You also get things like 6 bad scenarios, like you had a bad date, and you try to explain why that happened. And they basically give you a rating system of 1 to 7 on the cause of the outcome. I'm actually slightly optimistic. I'm not highly optimistic. I've always said to myself that I'm realistic, that I'm in the middle, but I actually lean a little bit more optimistic. So some people in the room are probably going to be realists, where you look at the way the world really is. You're actually going to be performing better if you lean more optimistic. The more optimistic, the more successful. So the attributional style questionnaire is looking at 3 areas in your life: personalization, permanence, and pervasiveness. And I'll explain what those 3 mean. So personalization is when something happens to you, the good grade, the bad grade, you sold some insurance, you didn't sell some insurance. How do you explain it in relation to yourself? Is it an external reason or an internal reason? So here's an example with personalization. I go on Tinder, I'm trying to date someone, we go on a date, and the date didn't work out very well. Well, a pessimist would say, I'm unlovable. It's my fault. It's me. But an optimist would say something like, yeah, it was a bad date, but the restaurant server was really rude and we didn't have a good time. And so I'm blaming the restaurant server. Or you could say, I didn't like him or her, as opposed to I'm unlovable. So you notice where one is blaming yourself, the other is blaming someone else. And this is not necessarily not taking responsibility for situations, but it's basically saying this failure, this bad date was because of things outside of me, like the nasty waiter, I did not like him or her, they were boring, they weren't for me, as opposed to it's all my fault. Like they're fine, the waiter's great, the restaurant's great, he or she are the most amazing people in the world. The problem is me. So internalization is where pessimism comes. So optimists bring external causes to the failure, which means that you have more resilience to try. So now we get into permanence. So let's say you go for a job interview and you didn't get the job. An optimist would say that this setback is temporary. I didn't get that particular job because it wasn't a good fit for me. But a pessimist would say, I'll never get a job. So you notice how they take the rejection of one event and they make it a permanent event, that I'm never going to get a job. But the optimists is say they're just going to keep it isolated to that one interview. Yeah, I didn't get that job. And the reason is it wasn't a fit for me. I didn't get along with them, but that has no impact on me being able to get a job at my next interview. But a pessimist would say, why bother get another interview? I got rejected for this job, I'm going to be rejected for the next one. That's where permanent comes in. So what we want to do is your setback should be viewed as temporary versus permanent. And then the next one is pervasiveness. So for example, I have the Hult sailing team in Boston. And what I do is I take students out on Boston Harbor. I started it for COVID so that the students could get some fresh air. I wanted some fresh air too, and I miss the students in the summertime. So anyone that comes to Boston, you can join the Hult Boston sailing team. It's actually a WhatsApp group. I'll put my contact information in there. You can join the WhatsApp group, and I'll give you notifications of when we're sailing in Boston. So if you come to the Boston campus, that'll start up in May. So let's take a look at me with sailing. I've been sailing for about 8 years, but I lived for almost a year in China in the summertime, and I didn't sail that summer. And you need to practice sailing. So I got really rusty, and I recertified myself for my sailing licensure, for my sailing licenses. And I was rusty, I wasn't very good. And I went out and I took some Hult students. And on the beautiful days, the sailing was great because the wind was perfect, the sun is nice, the ocean's perfect. But one day we went out and it was really, really windy and really choppy. And I did not do a good job sailing. So if you see this, you did a bad job sailing the boat. That's me. Michael did a bad job sailing the boat. When I docked the boat hand said, hey, how was the sail? And I said to him, quote, it was too windy and choppy that day to sail well. So I kept the reason, notice that I externalized it, that I made it the wind's fault, not my fault. And I made it specific that today, this time sailing, it was too windy and choppy to sail well. So I actually had an optimistic explanation on why the sail did not go well. But a pessimist would have taken a pervasive point of view and would have said, I'm a lousy sailor, and anything else I try, I'm going to be a lousy sailor, I'm going to be a bad mountain biker, I'm going to be a bad yogi. And so this is what a pessimist does, is that they take the area of failure and they expand it into other domains. So the same thing would happen with an exam. So let's say that you do poorly on an exam. The optimist would say, I don't do well at math. I don't do well at statistics. I don't like it. I don't put any effort into it. Therefore, I don't do well. That's actually optimistic. But a pessimist would say, I'm just a bad student. I'm bad at statistics, and I'm going to be bad at anything else I try. Dating, career, doesn't matter. I'm just a failure and I'm a loser. That's what pessimists say. And this is the three areas that we want to talk about to change that inner voice. So going back to the MetLife study, they tested the ASQ optimism exam on 200 agents that they had hired through their old methodology. And they split the agents into the top 50% optimists and the bottom 50% optimists. And here's what they found. The people who were in the top half of optimism sold 37% more insurance in years 1 and 2. Now, this also means that the top 50% optimists at Hult Business School are going to have a higher GPA. And this is what I'm teaching you today. If I can increase your optimism, your GPA is going to go up. Now, is there just a basic level of optimism, or does more optimism mean higher GPA, higher success? The answer is yes. Then they divided people into the top 10% optimists and the bottom 10%. And they found that now the top 10% sold 88% more. So the more optimistic you are, the more successful you'll be, the more insurance you sell, and the higher your GPA, because you're going to be more resilient and say, hey, I'm a good person, I'm smart, I'm successful. If I had a setback, I'm just going to try harder. And I'm going to be motivated to try harder because I'm an optimist. The pessimist isn't going to try again. So let's keep going. So here's the life career profile hiring method, and it was based on empirical and theory-based criteria. So the empirical was, what is your experience in selling life insurance? The more you have sold in the past, the more likely we're going to hire you. Then there's the theory-based, the more intelligent you are, aptitude, and the more motivated you are, the more we want you. So what they found with the original exam is that only 30% of applicants actually scored above a 12. So it was really a hard exam to get past the experience and the aptitude. So 30% passed the quiz. Then they moved to the interview phase. So this is just MetLife. This is nothing from Penn. There's no optimism in this. They moved to the interview phase. And if the manager liked them, they got a job offer. Well, the 30% went in, and then that got whittled down to 8.3%. That was the 5,000 out of 6,000. Now, here's what they found. That many high scorers were actually poor salespeople, and not enough people passed the exam. And so it was understaffed at MetLife. So the question was, could poor scorers sell well? If so, how do you pick them? This is the same thing that Penn was having, that they were bringing in students that had high SATs from high school and high GPA. So that was empirical and theory-based. But about 12% of students were failing out in year one, which means they were bringing in the wrong people. So 10% were having a bad year, they failed out, but then there should have been 10% of students who had been rejected that may have done well at Penn, but Penn didn't pick them the right way. And this is why I want to change the way Hult does its application process, because I think that I can pick more promising students before they come to Hult so that we can not have this dropout rate. So let's keep going. Here are the standard predictors of success. There's aptitude, are you smart? And motivation, do you want it? Now watch the blind spot of just using this criteria. Let's look at the Olympics. I'm an amazing athlete, aptitude. I want to win the gold medal, motivation, but I think I'm going to lose. That's not optimistic. You think that person's going to win a gold medal thinking, I think I'm going to lose? And what about a student? I'm a really smart student. I want to get an A, but I think I'm going to fail. So this is where optimism comes in. But now here comes the new self-talk. If you add aptitude, are you smart, with motivation, do you want it, and optimism, do you think you can do it, here would be the new self-talk. I'm an amazing athlete. I can win the gold medal. I want to win the gold medal, and I can. And what about studying? I'm a smart student. I want to get an A, and I can. So this is where optimism comes in. You need the third component. So the next test that they did with Penn is they took 104 agents who had been hired via the career profile method only. This was the old method that MetLife was using. Then they gave them the ASQ optimism quiz. Now, all of them scored above national average for optimism. But what they found was what happened with the top 25% optimists. They sold 50% more insurance than the rest of the group. And what about the bottom 25%? They were 300% more likely to quit. Same thing would happen at Penn and at Hult. The most optimistic students will be having the higher GPA, and the least optimistic will be more likely to drop out. So then what they did is they combined both test scores, and they said, what if we had people that were in the top of the MetLife program test and the top of the Optimism ASQ, what would happen? They sold 56% more insurance. So again, you can do the same thing for Hult. The top 50% students on GPA, SAT, and Optimism are going to have higher GPA. And yes, you can learn how to be optimistic if you're currently a pessimist. So then what Penn did is they wanted to do what was called the Special Forces Study. They took 15,000 applicants who took the career profile plus the optimism quiz. The first goal of the exam of the study was to hire 1,000 people on the MetLife method. This is the control group. They weren't doing anything different. Then the second goal was to hire just 100 people if they came in the top 50% of optimism, but barely failed the career profile. So their score was a 9 to 11, not the 12, which means they would have never gotten an interview. So here's what we're looking for. What if your GPA was lower in high school? Your SATs were lower, not even enough to get an interview at Penn, but your optimism was really, really high. Would that overcome the gap? Well, this was a $3 million risk because they were hiring 100 agents that would have never been hired by MetLife at a $30,000 training cost, $3 million. That was the bet. And here's what they found was the optimists who had passed the career profile in year one, they outsold the pessimist by 8%. In year two, they outsold the pessimist by 31%. But the special forces group, who had failed the MetLife exam by a few points, but had high optimism, they outsold the pessimists who got hired, who had scored over a 12, by 21%, and then 57% in year two. Over the 2 years combined, they outsold all the agents by 27%. So this is the same thing as having a student who didn't have, they had like B's in high school, but they come into Hult and they get A's because they're so optimistic. So the two side effects were optimists kept improving over pessimists. And the researchers were curious, is this because you're encouraged by success? So if you start getting A's when you come to Hult, that's going to encourage you to keep getting more A's because you're getting verification that you can be successful. They also did find that optimism actually predicted selling results, which means I can predict who's going to have a high GPA who comes into my class on the first day of school. And I actually find out that I'm right, that the more optimistic the student, the better off they do. And you can tell a really big optimist, it's very obvious to spot them. You spot them in about 5 minutes, the same way you can spot a pessimist. And their GPA is higher on the optimist side. So let's keep going. The new MetLife hiring policy is that you have to pass the career profile with 12 or higher. That's the old method. And you have to be in the top 2/3 of ASQ, which basically means you're not going to get into MetLife if you're a pessimist. So realists and optimists get in. The second way to get into MetLife is you barely fail the career profile. You get a 9 to 11, but you're in the top half of optimism. So basically, they avoid hiring pessimists. They hire strong optimists with slower aptitude and motivation. And this is the entrance policy that I'd like to change at Hult, where you can certainly take the super smart students from high school, but not if they're pessimists, not if they're deeply pessimistic. Don't bother. But then the second one is the students that don't really quite make it on GPA, like they just barely meet the threshold, or they're below the threshold with SATs and GPA, but they're optimistic. Bring them into Hult because they're actually going to probably outperform the other students. So here are some interview questions that you want to be mindful of. And you're going to be looking at these, but this is really where we want you to do well if you get an interview at Hult or any college. So you typically get these almost in every job interview. Tell me about a great success and why it turned out that way. Tell me about a failure and why it turned out that way. So the optimist, if something doesn't go well, they're going to blame other people, whereas the pessimist is going to blame themselves. The optimist is going to say, it was temporary. It was just this once. Pessimist says, it will always be this way. The optimist says, it was just this situation. It was just a one-off occurrence. But the pessimist says it's going to bleed everywhere into all domains of life. This happens everywhere in my life. So UPenn actually has changed its admissions policy where they found that Just high GPA and high SATs was actually a poor predictor of college performance with an over 10% dropout rate. So now what they do is that they will let you in if you have a slightly lower GPA, slightly lower SATs, but high optimism. So again, here's the new admission policy. Not as high GPA, not as high SATs, very high optimism is a better predictor of college performance, and you actually get higher GPA. So the cool thing about optimism is you can learn to do it. And what I encourage you to do is get the book, Learned Optimism. And what you basically do is that you just start to challenge yourself on how you think. So if you're going to be too pessimistic, you can just ask yourself questions like, is it true? Am I really stupid? Am I really a bad person? Am I really dumb? Am I really going to be a failure for the rest of my life? When you start to challenge that negative thinking, you could say, I'm not stupid. I didn't do well on this exam, but it's because I didn't study enough. I was hungover. I slept too long. I didn't attend all the classes. If I start to get a good night's rest and I get some good food in my body and I pay attention, sit in the front row, ask questions, meet the professor, go out for coffee, ask him, hey, how do I get an A in your class? What should I do? I tell you, I have 50 students in each class on average. Only 2 invite me out for coffee, but the 2 that do, I always know they're going to get an A because they care and they're also optimistic. And I will tell them the best way that they can actually navigate my class to get an A. So we are right at 12:45. So I'll just do a quick summary. To increase peak performance in GPA, turn off notifications when you're trying to do something that requires focus. Turn on airplane mode. Work in 52-minute chunks with 17-minute breaks and keep repeating that cycle. And remember, permanent, personal, and pervasive. Setbacks are external, they're temporary, and they're isolated. And get the Learned Optimism book. If pessimism is a challenge for you, the book will actually go through various exercises that you can do to be more optimistic. But the biggest one is just challenging your thinking. So in the next 15 minutes, we can open it up for any Q&A that we may have. I think I've got 3 here in the box. Okay, Fiorella, so I can,
Yes,
will you just read the first one to me and we'll
sure,
answer them? Okay.
sure. So we have a question from Spilia. What do you think about Pomodoro technique, working for 25 minutes and taking a 5 minutes break?
Sure, that's a popular one. It's the same concept. You're basically doing more work with a shorter break. So you notice that the ratios are all the same, that you have a higher chunk of work and then you have a smaller amount of break, and you just keep toggling back and forth. Try 25 and a 5, see if you like it. The research that the US Army did, they found out that it was 52 and 17, but you notice that if you divide the two, 5 by 25 and then the 52 by 17, you're going to be getting a ratio between 3 and 5. Just try them out. Try 25 and 5, see how that works for you. Try 52 and 17. For me, 40 and 20 works, but you notice that the work component is at least double the rest component. So I'm at 2 to 1, and Pomodoro is 5 to 1, and the US Army is around 3 to 1. But the work ratio is higher than the rest ratio. But it comes down to an individual, what works for you. For me, 25 minutes is too short because I do some like more intense thinking, on the academic side. So I want the 40 minutes. But sometimes I'm thinking so hard at 40 minutes, I'm like ready for a break. But try them out and just see what works for you. And the next one.
And then we have a question from Pavan. What are the major factors to be focused on in a study after GPA?
Oh, I love this one. Okay. I tell students, don't worry about grades. And I mean that. Don't worry about grades. Worry about the information. Take the class because you want to take the class. And the class is not meant to be done to get an A. That's not the point. If you like, I teach on mostly what I teach is entrepreneurship. So if a student comes to take my entrepreneurship class, imagine we got 2 students. One says, I want to take your entrepreneurship class and get an A. Another one says, I want to be the next Apple, and I want to take your class to learn how to do that. The student that wants to be the next Apple, they're going to get an A because they're using my class as a stepping stone. So I would say sign up for classes because you really want to take the classes, and take the classes because you want to apply them in the real world for real, that you want to use them. Don't worry about the grades. The grades are going to follow you. So if you are really into the material and you really get interested in it, then the A is going to follow you. But I would never take a class that I don't want to take and hope to get an A, because you're kind of pushing a rock up a hill. So I wouldn't even worry about grades. I would just focus on, I'm taking the class because I'm really into the class. I really want to use this information, either because I just love the information or I'm going to apply it somewhere else. And then that A is going to follow you. So I actually don't focus much on grades. And I tell that to my students too, that those that really want to be in my class and they really want to learn the information, the A comes easy to them. The students that, yeah, they took the class because they had to, it was a requirement, they don't do well. They actually don't, because they don't want to be there and there's no optimism towards it. So I'm glad you asked that question. Is the book available in India? I'm pretty sure that the book has been around for at least 20 years. So if you go on Amazon, you could grab it. It's also, I think it's on Audible now, but it's also an ebook on Amazon. And they probably it has been translated into over 20 different languages. So it's probably been translated. Um, uh, if your local language is Farsi, I'm pretty sure that it's been translated into that. How can I attend your class? Well, next semester I am teaching global human rights in Boston and what's the other one? Contemporary ethics. Take the ethics class. It's going to be amazing because I do dilemmas. It's all going to be case studies. So it's going to be things like 2 autonomous vehicles that have 4 people each in it. You have to program who's going to die. How do you decide? Someone's got to go over the cliff. So I'm actually going to be doing a lot of artificial intelligence ethics for programming algorithms. Okay, what's next, Fiorello?
So next, are there any strategies to become more optimistic if we have pessimistic subconscious beliefs?
Yes, spend time with optimists. So you are the sum of the 5 people you spend your time with. So you're probably hanging around pessimists, which just because we all like to be around like-minded people. Start hanging around some optimists and say, hey, what do you say to yourself when you fail? What do you say to yourself in your head? Like I started out as a pessimist because my family's pretty pessimistic. When I started hanging out with optimists, they basically gave me more optimistic things to say. The other thing you can do is write a gratitude list, things that you're grateful for in the day. And another exercise called 3 good things. So every day, write down what are 3 good things that are going for you. Like it's really easy to be pessimistic and say, coronavirus sucks, I'm stuck in the house, blah, blah, blah. Really easy to be negative. But it's harder to be positive, but we need to create that neural pathway if you're pessimistic. So 3 good things would be, I got a new puppy 2 days ago and I've been meeting nice new neighbors. The last 2 days have been 75 degrees and sunny. This is the second time that I've given this webinar today, and I'm really enjoying the people that I'm meeting around the world. You get to choose what you want to pick out in the world. You want to pick out the bad stuff like it's raining today, or you want to pick out the good stuff that I have a puppy that's helping me meet my neighbors. We all have good and bad stuff going on in the day. It's what you focus on. So I would encourage you, if you're pessimistic, start to focus on what's working in your life, what is going well, and just write down 3 good things and you'll start to see, oh, you know what? Some things are going well. They really are. So I would start with that, but get the Learned Optimism book. And that's going to be a great start for you. Next.
We have some from Anonymous. When I blame others in an interview following the optimistic approach, doesn't it show that I cannot take responsibility for the failure of a project? Wouldn't it show that I am a bad team player and not aware of my weaknesses?
Yeah, when I read the book, I said the same thing. I was like, this person isn't taking responsibility. Now, remember, this study was about finding people who are successful. It didn't say that they were good people or that they were realistic people or they were honest people. It was who's successful in selling. So someone who is just doggedly focused on, I'm going to sell, I'm a great salesperson. Anyone that doesn't want to buy my stuff, they're just an idiot. You could take that approach. And maybe I'm not selling well because I'm obnoxious, but if you keep saying, all of my failures are other people's fault and I don't take responsibility, you're actually going to sell more. So you're right. There are some people who can be too optimistic and they're not taking responsibility. So where I kind of go off the train of this scientific study is please take responsibility when it's time for you to take responsibility. Like the day that I didn't sail very well, I did say it's because it was too windy. But in the back of my head, it's because I'm not that good of a sailor. That's true. A better sailor would have sailed better in that windy environment and not cut the trip short. But I cut it short because I didn't really know what I was doing. But I didn't beat myself up over it and say, I suck. I'm not going to do this again. Instead, I said, it was too windy to sail well. I know that I'm rusty. I need some more practice. I'm great on a sunny, beautiful day. On a really challenging sailing day, not going to be very good at it, but I'm not going to beat myself up over it either. So I would say, yeah, I think you picked out a really great point that some people can be too much. For example, if we want to go into politics, so no one ever thought that President Trump was going to win the election, the first time that he tried. They said he was unqualified. No one believed it. And you see, he doesn't take responsibility for anything. He blames everybody else. And I don't like that about a person. However, he's the president and I'm not. So I agree with you that this is not a characteristic that I admire or want people to cultivate in their lives. But I'm sharing with you a scientific study, and this is what came out, that people that don't take responsibility were actually more successful in the study. I would encourage you to take responsibility, but don't beat yourself up. You can say, look, I didn't do well on the exam because I didn't study for it. But don't go so far as to say I'm an idiot because you're not. So I would just say, take responsibility for the part that you're responsible for, but don't keep pointing the finger at yourself that you're a bad person. Okay, what's
Um,
next?
I think we have some time for one more if you want to.
Sure.
Um, isn't it good to also find some reasons for failure in yourself? But you should be looking into things you can change, not the ones you cannot. For example, you can learn more, but it's harder to change your IQ. That way you can also improve, right?
Okay, I like this one. Now, it's actually an issue of how do you want to focus? So let's say I failed at something. Do you want to label it that? Do you want to say that I failed? Or do you want to reframe it and say, okay, I didn't do as well as I wanted. Is it failure or is it feedback? When I first started to go to Harvard, I got a C on a paper. I was devastated. I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail. I went to the teaching assistant and said, oh my God, my first paper is a C. I'm scared I'm going to fail out. She goes, it's not failure. It's feedback. We're just telling you that the paper you wrote was worth a C. We're not telling you that you're dumb. We're telling you that your paper's worth a C. And if you want an A, we're giving you feedback on what you handed us. If you want a B, sit down with me and I'll tell you how to get a B. You want an A? I'll tell you how to do that. So I would encourage you not to use the word failure, but use the word feedback, because that is what it is. Did you fail the exam? You got a D? Okay, you want to say that's failing? It's actually not technically. A C is not failing. A lot of people, when they get a C, if they're a perfectionist, they say they're failing. I have perfectionist students, they get a B, they say I failed. Like that's what they say to their head. So I would say you can take your failures as feedback. And also, if you have anything um, that's not going well for you, you could look at those as opportunities for growth. That's another way to look at it. Okay, I didn't sail well. I crashed the boat into the dock. I've done that. Okay, am I a failure? Well, it's an opportunity for growth. I could maybe take some private lessons on how to dock a boat in the wind, or I could call myself an idiot. So it's really just sort of like being nice to yourself on how you label your things. But I do like to look at, where do I have opportunities for growth? Where did I get feedback that I wasn't really happy about the feedback? And could maybe I get some help on that? So it's just changing the words from being more negative to more benign and more neutral, where I'm not beating myself up and saying I'm useless. Okay,
All
who's
right.
next? Mhm.
Um, I think.
Do we have
Yeah. Do you?
Perna?
Sorry.
Uh, do you see
Yes.
Perna's question? Did we answer that one? The line that separates?
Um.
I'll read it. It says, what
Okay.
is the line that separates being
Oh.
optimistic and denying responsibility. Also, where is the line that separates being optimistic and daydreaming? Well, daydreaming is basically, you can take daydreaming a couple different ways, as opposed to focus. So I guess you're thinking that you're daydreaming that you're going to be like great at something, but you don't really have the pathway to get there. So let's just answer these one at a time. Where's the line that separates being optimistic and denying responsibility? Take responsibility for what you're responsible for. You know when you're kidding yourself. So I think it's okay to take responsibility. I think that's fine. And please do that because people respect that. You also don't get many opportunities if you don't. Did the question just pop away? It just popped away on me. The other one was between optimism and daydreaming. It's okay to dream big, but also create a pathway to get there. So if I want to, put a condo on Mars, okay, how could I actually do that? And that's what Elon Musk wants to do. Elon Musk has made a lot of things happen. So if I said that, maybe I'm daydreaming. If Elon Musk says it, then maybe he's being optimistic. So I would say if you can see a pathway through mentorship or education to get that goal, it might not be daydreaming. But I think you can also, dream big, but also dream realistically. And there's that balance, but I think it's okay to shoot for the stars because you'll at least get to the moon. Is there a way to, next to Francisco, is there a way to influence a team that has negative and positive people? Yes, I did this in Armenia when I was teaching a group like that. There were 50-50. And I gave him my favorite quote from Henry Ford. If you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. If you think you're going to fail, you are. So why don't we just stop right now? If you think that you can do something and you're going to be successful at it, let's go forward. But if you want to put negative energy, if you want to try to get somewhere driving a car with the brakes on, you're not going to get too far. So it's up to you. If you think that your negative point of view is going to work, I would challenge that. What I would do in a team is you want to have all optimists and only one pessimist, because the pessimist actually has the benefit of pulling all the optimists away from being daydreamy or Pollyanna, where they're just saying, oh, we're going to be amazing, we're going to be amazing. You only need one pessimist because they are so incredibly toxic in a room. You only need one to pull a group of optimists down to reality. So having all optimists and just one pessimist in a team actually makes for a better team, because if all of those people can get along, you're going to hit a home run. So in the interest of time, let me go to Revzi right away. How to not blame ourselves for a bad GPA, and how can I convince my parents of that? Revzi, you're just getting feedback. If your GPA isn't if you want your GPA to be 2 points higher than what it is, whatever you're doing right now is not working for you. Find someone who has a higher GPA and say, how do you do it? What do you do? And believe me, you're going to start to learn things like, I schedule my homework. I hang around smarter people than myself. I sit in the front row. I don't have my phone on. I basically ask smart students, how do you do it? How do you write your papers? Because there's actually methods to this. So start to go to people who have the success that you want and ask them how they do it. Believe me, they will tell you because they're going to be flattered that you're complimenting them. So just go to people who are doing better than you and say, how do you do that? It's what I do with sailors. I go to better sailors than myself. And I'm like, how do you sail in the wind? How do you dock a boat under 30-mile-an-hour winds when it's going against you? They teach me, and they love to show off. So start asking those people. Last ones, do you have any plans of conducting online classes in the future? Yeah, I teach online all the time. So I will be teaching January semester is contemporary ethics and global human rights. I actually want to come teach in the London campus. So if anyone's on London, they want a class taught, I would love to teach positive psychology, because this is what I just taught you today. And we're actually out of time. Like I said, I got a new puppy. I have to bring her to the vet right now. So I'm so glad to see you. Let me put into the chat my WhatsApp contact information. So anyone that wants to join the Hult sailing team, we will be sailing next May. That's also so yes, connect with me on WhatsApp. I'll put you on the sailing team. I also do the Savor and Succeed Positive Psychology Roundtable. So Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I can also put you on that, where I teach you on UPenn positive psychology techniques. And that's it, everyone. So have a great day. Fiorella, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, that Michael. That was really insightful and very useful topic. As we said before, a recording of this will also be sent out in the follow-up email in the next few days. If you feel this was useful to you, we have several other webinars coming up, the next being on Wednesday, December 9th, with Professor Ali Fenwick discussing physically distant but socially connected. Very interesting, so do not miss it. In order to register, just go to hult.edu/virtual skills. So that's all from us today. Thank you very much for your class and your time, Michael. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you again.
Thanks,
Bye.
Fiorella. Everyone,
Thank
good to
you.
see you all. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.